Khalid Amiri. He's a journalist and former Radio Television of Afghanistan presenter. So do you remember the humble Rolodex? Or what about photo albums, like actual photo albums you had in your hands? Or landline phones, some of them with really long cords in the kitchen? Now, throughout the years, as the internet became increasingly part of our daily lives, more and more things have fallen victim to digitisation. Now, some things, like bad photos that took ages to develop and filing cabinets, we can say good riddance to. But other things we might really miss or long for, like uninterrupted focus, empathy, the feeling of being out of reach and being invisible, like to be able to genuinely get lost and completely switch off. In a new book, 100 Things We've Lost to the Internet, author Pamela Paul walks us through what we've lost and why newer doesn't always mean better.
It's a mixture really of things that are physical objects that we've lost, like filing cabinets and photo albums and that thing we called paperwork. Some of them are relationships, like the blind date. Remember those? Some of them are habits, things that we used to do, like maintain eye contact with other human beings, look up when somebody walked into the room. We lose those moments to create. We lose that time to just sit with ourselves. One of the things I find so interesting about the internet is that because you have all of this stuff constantly coming at you, it's like you're cycling through not just information, but also a whole suite of emotions that normally wouldn't hit you within, a space of 24 hours. So you go onto Facebook and you're like, oh no, my friend's uncle died and I need to, respond to that. And then you might see an anniversary of someone's divorce and you think, oh wow, they split up and it was X number of years ago, and remember their wedding. If you think about, like, just as a human being, what it was that we used to have to grapple with purely on an emotional level before the internet, it was like maybe one or two things a day about not just ourselves, but also other people. And it's not even just our family and our friends that we're encountering online. It's all of their family and all of their friends. I realized that boredom had just kind of disappeared, right? We're never bored anymore. We create when we are bored. When we don't have input, we can generate output. But because we're so constantly entertained and distracted and stimulated by this thing we keep in our pocket, we never have that absence of input. And so we never have those moments where we just don't have anything to do. I think the ability to be unobserved is gone forever. That's really difficult for me. It's really difficult for most people. It's terrible for young people. They take fewer risks. They don't raise their hand in class and say something that could possibly be taken the wrong way. They don't do some ridiculously stupid dance and try out something new in a public setting, because again, they could be taped, they could be filmed. It's like we've all become reality stars unwittingly of our own reality show. And that is maybe fun sometimes, maybe exciting for some people. Most of the time, it's pretty awful.
All right, before we get to some of the deeper stuff here, and before I address the fact that Zara thinks all of this is just completely mad nostalgia.
What gave it away?
Your laughter, I think. But what are some of the things that you do or don't miss from the pre-internet age? Andrew?
I miss that we all used to have the same experience about, in Australia, if you were living in Townsville or Perth or Melbourne, we'd all sit down and watch Countdown as young people, and we'd all have the experience at the same time. So we didn't get to choose our joint experiences. So I think that's what I miss, that because we've got so much choice, but when we had less choice, we did more together. We did more joint experiences, which I think increased social cohesion.
And Neela, what about you? And I can see you've got a typewriter there behind you. That's a classic relic right there.
It is. And, you know, I've spent all day saying, oh, I don't miss anything. But I've realised that the thing that I really miss is letters. You know, those handwritten letters that people would send you. Or, you know, for me, I bought that vintage typewriter because my grandfather used to send me letters, you know, all typed up on, you know, the old-fashioned airmail thing that you folded up.
Yeah.
You didn't put it, yeah, the aerograms, that's the thing. No, I really miss those, that bit of connection. And email is not quite the same, is it?
No, it is very different to receiving something in the mail or to when you're travelling overseas and sending something from far away. Greg?
Yeah, well, Julia, one thing I miss was public phones. I mean, when I was a young journalist in the Pleistocene age and was sent as a foreign correspondent, I remember once being at the Kennedy Centre, which you'd know well in Washington, DC, at a concert, ringing up, and so you didn't have mobile phones didn't exist. So you ring up the office, reverse charges, and the office said to me, we need another 6 paragraphs on the president's statement today. So there I was screaming, it was a bad line, so I'm screaming over the public phone, Cap R. Ronald, Cap R. Reagan said, open quotes, tear down that wall. And you could see the rest of the people in the Kennedy Centre kind of giving a wide berth to this lunatic. But all over the world, all you needed was a public phone and you could file your copy.
Yes. Now, then there's also street directories and things like that, which I don't miss at all. Zara, do you think we're looking at all of this through a sepia-coloured lens? Is this nostalgia?
I mean, without having lived in the era that you are all alluding to, that sounds amazing, yelling down a payphone. I think that it is important to recognise all the good that the internet has brought us, and that nostalgia is a great thing, but that it also may warp your perception in retrospect of how something was and how difficult some things may have been. And I mean, where I'm sitting and referring to the author mentioning that people, especially young people, can't go unwatched, that's actually been really fundamental to the Black Lives Matter movement and Me Too and all of these really, really important things that could not have happened without the internet. And so, you know, rolodex, payphones, they're all great, but a greater democracy seems a bit better to me. What about, it's interesting if we are hitting a greater democracy, but that's we can return to that question. What about the idea of focus, of long periods of uninterrupted time? Now, Pamela was talking about boredom and how people get more creative when they're bored. But you have to wonder if we were capable of spending hours without picking these up and flipping them through it, or reading kind of longer books and longer articles than we currently do. Do you think that matters? I mean, I guess I just want to know what the metric is for greater creativity that's being you know, created during these times. Because if I look at TikTok, and I don't mean to lean into stereotypes here, but if I look at TikTok, there are amazing young people who are creating businesses around themselves and around their creativity, and that just wouldn't have been possible. And of course, boredom will look different to you and to me, but the fact that when I'm bored, I go look at this app that teaches me something every time I look at it, and that I can connect and empathise with the experience of other young people around the world, I think is pretty special. And I just think that we need to reform and always update our understandings of how the world might look and what these concepts like boredom and creativity, because I don't think there's any shortage of innovation or creativity with the next generation. What do you think, Greg, about that?
Well, Julia, I don't want to speak on behalf of the past, because the past was a foreign country and it had its own villains. It had its own villains. But I remember as a 20-year-old, we would read routinely books that were 1,000 pages long. Henry James, Thomas Mann, Dostoevsky. And there is a depth and an integral quality to those books which you can't get in any other way. Now I write books that are 350 pages long, and every review says this is a very long book. It's too long for the average reader. And I think the shortening of our attention span creates a certain superficiality. The other thing I'd say about the net is that it's often very abusive, of course, but also it often gives you a false image of reality. People think that because something is trending on Twitter, that is the real world, and often it's very unrepresentative.
Zara.
Well, sorry. Absolutely, and that's definitely not wrong. But I guess to that, I'd just say that there are more people who are able to access that information in a way that when you talk about 1,000-page books, a lot of people don't have access, you know, either in an intellectual sense or just in a physical sense to that sort of resource. And the fact that I can do something on my page and hundreds of thousands of young people can read about the news now, when ordinarily or traditionally they had to go to a corner store, pay money, pick it up. I think it's important to talk about the access to these things and these services that are new.
We should add that you know, the author is not saying there aren't really great things about the internet, and that it is in fact like a form of infrastructure now. We're not going backwards. It's like roads. It's like electricity. It's I think it's a moment of pausing and saying, did we used to live differently, and kind of does that matter? Were some things slower? Could people make more mistakes? And does that matter? You know, on the flip side of Black Lives Matter, we still get a lot of extremism that gets fomented online, and a lot of misogyny and a lot of trolling. So it's kind of all that baggage. What do you think, Neela?
Look, I think the internet's great. You know, I'm very much the edge generation. You know, I grew up with no internet, and you know, now it's part of everything that we do. And overwhelmingly, I think it is positive. One of the things I found really interesting, if you look at the pandemic alone, is, and you compare it to the Spanish flu pandemic 100 years ago, even though we talk about the internet spreading all of this misinformation, that same misinformation was being spread in the Spanish flu. They had fights about masks. They had fights about social distancing. They had fights about lockdown. In a lot of ways, I don't think the internet is necessarily amplifying a lot of these things in and of itself. I think that's people, and people find ways to communicate. What the internet does is it brings like-minded people together. And some of the greatest advocacy I've done is by harnessing the powers of social media and a whole lot of people being brought together in collective action. So I think, you know, I think nostalgia is lovely. You know, I have nostalgia for my aerograms. Thank you for reminding me that's what they were called. But I think the more important, different question is, okay, we've got this technology, you know, what are the problems? Like, it's not about, we used to do it this way and it's a bit sad that we lost it. This is the future. What are the problems with it? You know, are there issues around algorithms and AI technology and the inherent biases that they have? You know, how do we optimize this technology and minimize the problems? I think that for me is the more interesting question.
As a youth advocate, Andrew, and someone who's active in international aid, what lens do you bring to this? Because you can see the power of it for activism, right?
I think it's usually when there's a discourse around this, it's a new way to discriminate against young people. So I think young people are digital natives. They know how to better use the good parts of the internet. And was very lucky to hear back from 10,000 young people in face-to-face consultations. They understand it. It's actually us old fogies that don't quite get it, and then we start putting our prejudices onto young people. I think the bit that's worrying to me, I mean, there are many things that Neela raised and I agree. I think the fact that you can choose your news and the reality is what worries me a little bit. Is that, you know, in the olden days, which I'd much rather live today, I'd much rather be a young person today with the access to information, but we used to have one news service which was independent, and we'd be able to get that. Right now, you can choose. If you're progressive, you go to progressive news. If you're more right-wing, you go to right-wing news. So I think that's what we're missing. But given the democratisation of the internet, given that young people use it to inform themselves, get active, it's us older people who don't use the internet that way.
Zara?
I love that. I think that's entirely correct. And I just get to the point of consuming news. Even if people weren't able to choose which news they got, I mean, in this country, we've got a lot of media concentration. So I think the fact that there are lots of options is a really great thing. And the fact that there are free options is even better. But I think that it's just about learning, like Neela said, about how we can use this incredible technology in a way that is safe for young people, and a lot of that comes with literacy and around teaching it earlier. And obviously there is a role that government will need to play and big tech will need to play, but it's just the beginning, and I think that the opportunities are endless, and it's really exciting as a young person to be, you know, at the forefront of this and to see what can happen.
And you're confident that it will improve democracy?
Yes, without a doubt. I think that we have a lot of case studies already in the decade or so that we've seen in the past that show that access to information is a good thing. And I'm not saying it's absolute. There are obviously horrific things, and, you know, Christchurch is just one example. But I think that if we can harness this technology for good use, there's a lot that can come out of it.